Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Losing the Plot. I'm Leo Robertson. I find artists of all varieties I find interesting. They're usually writers, they don't have to be. And we talk about their work, we talk about life, we talk about anything and everything. We lose the plot together, hence the title of the show. As always, we start with the latest of what's going on over at Aphotic Realm. Issue number 7 is out now. It's gruesome. Who doesn't love over-the-top 80s horror films? A punk band fights off a horde of possessed fans at a local concert. A makeout session at the cemetery takes a turn for the worst. Slashers, critters, demons, gore, hairspray. The 80s horror B-movie aesthetic is what issue 7 Gruesome is all about, so do check that out. The Realm also has its own merch store right on the Aphotic Realm site itself. You can buy t-shirts, beanies, caps and tank tops. And if you check out the new Aphotic Realm Instagram, you can see yours truly sporting an Aphotic Realm t-shirt in the dark grey heather colour. I think it's great. And there's loads of cool other merch. I'm sure I will get other stuff too. And I hope you will as well. Please do check out the merch in the store. Finally, I hope you will consider supporting Aphotic Realm on Patreon. As a patron, you'll get early access to podcast episodes such as this one. You can also get digital downloads of all Aphotic books as well. So do check that out. Please consider supporting Aphotic Realm on Patreon also.
I wrote this thing. I hope you like it. Let's talk about it, yeah. Let's lose track. Losing the Plot Podcast. Losing the Plot Podcast. Losing the Plot Podcast. Talking to Leo.
Our guests this episode are Brendan Vidito, author of Nightmares in Ecstasy, a collection of short stories out with Clash Books now, and Sam Richard, author of To Wallow in Ash and Other Sorrows, out October 11th with Nihilism Revised. Together, they worked on The New Flesh, a literary tribute to David Cronenberg, an anthology which is out probably in November with Weirdpunk Books. We had a great chat, and I hope you enjoy it. Here it is. KillerCon was a recent con, right?
Yes, just a couple of weeks ago, I think.
How did it go?
It was excellent. It's always a really fun con. I've only been to BizarroCon and KillerCon, but they're very much different experiences because I find KillerCon's a little more relaxed, so it allows more time to kind of breathe and to interact with different individuals, whereas BizarroCon, it's a very tight schedule. They're both totally different experiences, but a lot of the same people attend. But yeah, this year was great. It was fun, just being there, like as an editor as well as a writer, getting a chance to interact with some of the authors that were included in the upcoming Cronenberg anthology.
Oh, seriously? Who did you meet?
Well, we got to speak Ryan Harding. I met him this was my second year at KillerCon, but I didn't really speak to him the first year, so I got the chance I had lunch with him one day, and he's a really nice guy and a lot of fun to talk to. He's has this kind of near encyclopedic knowledge of trashy horror films. Who else was there? Charles, of course, was Charles Austin Muir. Sam, am I blanking on someone here? Who else was Cody Goodfellow. He's amazing. I think that was pretty much it if we were there. It was just a lot of fun. And
when, Sam, I can ask you, I guess, like when did both of you two meet?
2016, Sam?
That sounds right.
Yeah, it was Sam's first BizarroCon.
Yep.
And I believe it was the night of the press party on Saturday, maybe, and everyone was pretty drunk, and we just started talking about like J.G. Ballard and Cronenberg, and we started kind of getting into themed anthologies and talking about how like the Cameron Pierce had done a David Lynch themed anthology a few years prior. And we're just like, you know what? Why did anyone do a David Cronenberg anthology? There's a lot of potential there. And we'd known each other for a few hours, and we basically vowed if ever, like if anyone's going to do it, it'll be us. And flash forward, 5 years later, and it's finally happened.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, I always have a issue recalling like which night of the con it was. And I think we had like very briefly talked a previous night, probably with Charles and like Andy Wayne Adams and like Sam Reeve and a couple other people. But then like we got in this little like area and we just started like geeking out over that shit. Yeah. And it really was like the impetus of it was that Cameron Pierce anthology, the David Lynch one. It was like up to that point, I had done the music-based anthologies that I had co-edited with Emma Johnson, and it's like, oh yeah, like the film-based ones I could think of, there are very few. Not that there are like excessive amounts of music ones either, but it's like a filmmaker who seems so apt for someone to make a fucking lit-based anthology for them. Like Cronenberg is the most obvious choice.
And you're now the full owner of Weirdpunk Books, right?
Yes.
And it's looking to you're now going to start publishing novellas as well after this anthology, probably.
Yeah. I actually just got the okay to announce this.
I get another announcement.
On Losing the Plot. So Brendan and I's friend Ian Mueller writes as Joe Quinnell. They were in the Zombie Punks Fuck Off anthology, and recently they approached me with with a novella that they just wanted me to like have a look at and for edits and kind of beta read to see if there's anything they could do to, I don't know, shore it up, make it better. They had apparently written it a couple years ago and then just like threw it in a folder and thought it was shit, and then came back to it and was like, I actually think this might be all right. And so I read it and immediately was like, let me fucking publish this. So the name of it is The Mud Ballad, and it's similar in tone to something like Joe Lansdale's Freezer Burn, maybe mixed with Emma Johnson's Cattle Cult Kill Kill. It's really cool. It's like set in a sort of unknown time frame, sometime within the 20th century, like maybe the 20s, maybe as high as the 60s. It never really delves deep into that like aspect. It's just sort of timeless, and it's like really cool. And I just I couldn't say no. I mean, not that they were even asking. I read it and knew like, I want to publish this. They're a really good friend of mine. So I was like, let's do it. And thankfully they said yes.
That's awesome. I always love getting the exclusive announcements. So yeah, please keep them coming. Brendan, at this con, you were nominated for some Splatterpunk awards.
Yes, that was quite the experience. I was not expecting that at all. It was a huge honor, and yeah, it was funny because I was sitting next to Sam during the awards, and I think there was this moment where when they're announcing the nominees for collection, and I just looked over, and I think we had this like shared moment where like, yeah, I don't stand a fucking chance, because like you have like David J. Schow, Bentley Little, Mom Buka Dien, who wrote this excellent collection of kind of this weird African horror, literary horror type stuff. And Jeff Burke. So I was kind of like that young Canadian writer who just somehow inexplicably found his way into that nomination category. But yeah, obviously David ended up winning he was a best of collection, and yeah, obviously hugely deserved because he was a major influence on me. So yeah, he basically coined the name Spiderpunk. But it was a huge honor, and it was a lot of fun, and hugely encouraging going forward, because I'm just basically starting out my writing career. It's kind of like, it would be weird for me to win, I think, because like, I don't want to, you don't want to hit that plateau that early. Because I still like, I acknowledge that even looking back on my work now, like, and I think this is a typical thing for writers, is like you're overly critical of things you've written in the past, and I still have like a bunch of room to grow, and so that's something, that's a motivator now going forward, and help me become a better writer.
Sam, this is your debut short story collection, right? That's going to come out soon. Mm-hmm. So, when's it coming out? Do you know?
October 11th.
It took you a long time to piece it together, right?
Yeah, it did. I kept, it's 9 stories, and I kept just one more. And I even took a couple, or there were a couple that I was considering putting in it that I ended up not. I was like, I'd rather have it be more of these super sad, like grief horror stories than just like half, because it's 7 of the 9 of them. Mm-hmm. So I didn't include some stuff that it would have presumably been done sooner had I just like, oh, fuck it, I have these stories. But there was something inside of me that was just like, just write another. And then I'd like talk to SC Burke over at Nihilism Revised, and I'd be like, I think I'm done. I just have to look at it. And then I want to write one more. It was bad. And then I wrote another, a longer short story for a different project that I was like potentially going to put in the short story collection as well. And that one I was like, this tone is just wrong. So I had sort of waited on finishing that, and then didn't even end up including it, which is fine. But yeah, I stretched it out probably longer than it should have gone. Just one more story, just one more.
How about for you, Brendan? How many years was your book in the making?
I think the earliest story in that collection was from late 2013, and it released in 2018. So it's just, there are no way consistent throughout that, because like, while I was beginning those stories, I was in university, so I would only write when I had the time to do so. So it was in the last one in the collection, A Feast of You, was written, I think, only a few months before the thing actually, went to the printer. Because I wanted, that's in my mind, kind of a transitional story, and I wanted something longer to sort of fill it out.
Yeah, I think that one seems to be a fan favorite as well from reading the reviews.
Yeah, that's very humbling, because it's different, because when you're picking up that collection and it's being billed as sort of like a Clive Barker-esque like body horror thing, and most of the stories that come before A Feast of You are like very, very grotesque. That one's a little more rooted in psychological horror. Aside from, there's obviously that moment of cannibalism later in the story, but yeah, for the most part, it's like, it's more of my whole intention with that was I wanted to write a cosmic horror story disguised as a domestic drama, and that's sort of what I ended up with. There was only a few that I'd written that didn't end up in there, just because like they didn't match quality wise. But for me personally, and I know this isn't like necessarily common with others, but like short stories are come a little easier to me. I'm working on my first novel now, and I find that like considerably more challenging than short stories.
Sam, how about you? Have you attempted the novel format before?
So in the very early thousands, when I really started, like, I think I want to be a writer, I stumbled through writing 4 just utterly terrible novels that'll never see the light of day. They're just garbage. And then I kind of honed my skills, like writing a lot of nonfiction and writing weird experimental pieces. And then just over the past, 4 years or 3 years or something, started like, I want to write something longer again, but good this time. And I fairly recently finally finished writing the novella that I had been working on when Mo died. I had started it in a workshop in one of Garrett Cook's novella writing workshops. And after she died, I just like couldn't, it was just the wrong thing to write basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I like had a very specific vision for that story. And it's kind of about my childhood, which I don't know, I guess that's cliche, but there it is. But so I just spent like all that time after she died writing these short stories about her death and about my reaction to it. And I finally felt like, certainly not that I'm over it or that I'll ever be over it, but I'm just in a better place to be able to kind of write something that isn't just about tremendous amounts of grief.
Mm-hmm.
So I recently, and it was like really close to done. It was like 90% done. So I recently went through and finally finished it and did several rounds of edits and had some beta readers, including Brendan. And I submitted it to, I don't want to jinx myself, so I won't say the name of the press, but I recently submitted it. And if it doesn't find a home there, I, hope to have it find a home somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, it's my homage to 80s small creature horror plus satanic panic vibes. So that's,
Personally, I've never really understood genre or been that concerned with it, even when it's as basic as like horror, sci-fi, fantasy. I don't find it personally compelling to think about my stories in those kind of terms. But I get the impression from both of you that genre is really important, and in particular with this book, of course, it's body horror. And Brendan, in your collection, a lot of it is body horror as well. Can you talk about what that means to you, what it does, why it's important?
For me, I have a kind of a weird relationship with horror. I was kind of a late bloomer in terms of when I became interested in it. Growing up, I was really into fantasy and stuff. And then when I was 15 years old, I was diagnosed with systemic lupus. And basically, like because of that, I'm in the 1% that had it in his brain. So the symptoms originally had manifested as they were psychological in nature. So I was hallucinating and having delusions and whatnot. But there's also like a whole slew of like bodily issues because I was on these meds for too long and ended up needing a double hip replacement and a bunch of stuff. So in a way, like horror became a way for me to sort of cope with that very real fear of living with that illness. So when I was like in my later teens, I was deliberately like seeking out everything I could find that was like horror related, books or movies or whatever. And I was just like, ravenously consuming everything. And body horror, I guess, just really resonated with me because, for me, there's nothing more frightening than like something that's occurring within your body. There's no way to escape it. It's just like your body is the haunted house. You can't just like, run out the door and kind of escape it. So I wanted to challenge myself and see if I can kind of write stories like that on my own.
Are you writing about your own body?
In a way, yeah. Like some of the stories come from a very, I don't want to say they're autobiography, but there's always something. There's always a seed in there that I'm trying to explore. That I try to kind of tap into subjects that I can sort of understand on some level, no matter how weird or fucked up it ends up being.
Sam, how about you? What does body horror mean to you?
Fuck, I don't know. I think I like going a little bit back to the earlier portion of your question, just about genre. I actually think like Brendan and I probably have fairly similar philosophies as this. I don't want to speak for you, but just having read so much of your work, where it's like the genre is there to facilitate the underlying themes and emotions that you're like trying to deal with, specifically in regards to like your illness when you were younger. So much of that is like present in your work. Same with like the fucked up relationship dynamics.
Yeah.
A little too much about previous relationships you've had. I see it in, especially in the Rebound. It's like very apparent that that's about kind of an abusive, manipulative relationship. And I think for me, that's like much the same as like, I love horror and have since I was way too young to watch it because my dad had no filter, so we could literally watch anything. And then I go back to my mom's house, and it was like buttoned down, super conservative Christianville, but at my dad's it was like anything fucking goes. And I just kind of fell in love with the visceralness. I fell in love with the like uneasy feelings that you know, especially when you're that age, that it can like give to you, where they like really sink in deep, and you'll be at school and suddenly you're like a little bit afraid because you remembered this thing you saw, you know, 4 days ago. And not that I necessarily like am out to scare, it's more the other like eeriness, unsettling feelings are just, it's one of my favorite things. And at the same time, again, it's about like, I also love transgressive fiction. It's like my favorite genre, specifically Georges Bataille, Kathy Acker, William Burroughs, J.G. Ballard, that kind of stuff, where the kind of the point of it, yes, it's got all this fucked up stuff in it, or it's got all these taboo shattering moments, but the point is sort of what illumination comes through that. It's like you're learning entirely new things through wallowing in the filth as opposed to merely wallowing in the filth.
Mm-hmm.
And like, especially the last story in To Wallow in Ash is like heavily influenced by a Georges Bataille novella called Blue of Noon. And like every moment of writing that story was viscerally uncomfortable. It made it so I couldn't sleep. And I just kept like pushing into that feeling because there's something on the other side of that, which is hopefully like, truly that story is about like getting over the like lust that I still have for my late wife, right? Like the sexual component of our relationship. Like, how can I not desire a dead person for the rest of my life? And that's what that story is. So it's like genre, but I also, my stuff, I'm always trying to like pull in like my true emotion, my anxieties regarding this, my own grief, and kind of, I hate to, like, the term elevated horror is bullshit, but it's like, it's not just pulp, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I love pulpy stuff too, but I love like one of my favorite things in the world is the commingling of like the lowbrow and the highbrow, or the quote unquote lowbrow and the quote unquote highbrow. So it's like the aim of literature with the facade of, you know, grotesque, scary books.
I think that now, like, to bring up transgressive literature, like now in this climate where you can get like so heavily penalized by saying the wrong thing, even if you're just accidentally like uneducated about something. And yet at the same time, there are these like ridiculously disgusting books being published that nobody seems to care about. You know, it's like, if you just declare that that's what it is, people are like, okay, go for it. Say whatever. It's bizarre, and it perhaps it's even more liberating now that this stuff is still getting published.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Cronenberg specifically then. Brendan, favorite films? When did you discover him? What does it mean?
Okay, so I discovered him. It was around that time, like that kind of my self-taught horror education, like post-diagnosis. And I don't remember what the first film I watched. It might have been The Fly, I think. Because my dad showed me The Thing like a few years prior to that. And I think like it just, the two are weirdly kind of connected in my mind. So I think that might have been the first one. But the first Cronenberg film that really left an impact was Videodrome. So I think it was one of those things that as you're watching, and I think a lot of writers have this experience when they're watching or reading something, and they're like, holy shit, you can actually do that. You know, you can actually go that far, you can get that weird. Yes, and so I think that one, and also I really enjoyed Dead Ringers just for being the total kind of opposite end of that spectrum, where it's a lot more grounded. And it's as opposed to sort of delving into anything related to the body, he's getting deeper into the character's psychologies. And that's very interesting. That's something he's very adept at. He kind of like juggled these different elements in his work.
They're films for like a particular mood, though, right? I find.
Yeah, because he has very definite stages in his career. If you look at his early stuff, basically all the way from his short films like Crimes of the Future, all the way through maybe to, I think Videodrome might actually be the sort of the cap on that. And then he has that kind of psychological phase with Dead Ringers like M Butterfly and Crash. And then he has he goes deeper into that psychology, but he explores it on a more surface level with like Dangerous Method and then obviously his crime films. And now he's into sort of like his last one, I guess, was Map to the Stars, which was it was more just pure satire, but with his bleak sense of humor.
Yeah, I'd mentioned Maps to the Stars being my favorite of his, which I think is, I told a friend about it and she was like, that's not canon Cronenberg, don't say that's your favorite. So, but it's, like, I really like, the guy who wrote it is called Bruce Wagner. I don't know if you know him, he's like a novelist.
Yeah, what has he written?
Dead Stars, I think, is maybe his most famous novel. His first novel is called Force Majeure. But
okay.
Dead Stars, I think, is the best one because it's all about like he's obviously so clever and like has this encyclopedic writing style that he's using to write about like the Kardashians and stuff. It's bizarre. It's bizarre that he's so like willfully and joyfully wasting his talent, obsessing over like, you know, what action hero stars getting. It's really difficult to describe, and it's just about like people in LA, much like the film, I think people in LA really trying to get into the business of storytelling while at the same time being incredibly soulless and vapid and not really have anything to say, and finding that funny, which I think is pretty funny.
It is.
I think it must be a difficult thing to transform into satire or to make interesting, even though so many people are obsessed with it. I'd like to make good art about it, perhaps. Yeah,
and the thing that's really interesting about Maps to the Stars is like it's a satire about American film being made by a Canadian director. So that was like even when he announced that film, I thought it was just that's sort of a weird kind of he's just from the fringes, right? Because he's had experience in Hollywood, and I think early on, like there was a whole like long story about how he got Shivers off the ground, and I think for a while he was associated with Roger Corman and trying to get it done there, but they're gonna basically buy the screenplay off him and then switch it around, and his vision would probably.
Can you imagine what Roger Corman's produced Shivers would have looked like?
It'd probably been awesome, but not the same way that.
Right. More tits. We need more.
Yeah, interesting. Just Canadian, just like peering in from the outside into this industry and kind of doing his take on it. And I don't know if the screenwriter, was he American or?
I think he's American. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel a particular pride about Cronenberg being Canadian?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, not to knock Canadian cinema. There's a lot of great films that come out of here, but I feel like Canadian horror cinema is very, it's thin. There isn't much there. There's actually a really great book about a survey basically from the silent era all the way through. I think the Ginger Snaps is where it kind of ends. You get to see how weird and varied Canadian horror cinema it is, and like movies like have you heard of The Brain?
No.
It's like the guy from Reanimator, the dude who plays like the guy who gets his head cut off. He's a scientist and he's basically gives sentience to this brain and it's like eating people and stuff. But there's really weird movies like that out of Canada, but nothing. And obviously, like there's the few that have slipped into the mainstream. But yeah, so Cronenberg's sort of always been at the pinnacle for me of Canadian genre cinema.
Canadian, like in particular, I find the Canadian sense of humor is just so unique. Like I work with a Canadian guy and I was like, you're saying the weirdest stuff every day. Like I don't find it funny, but I appreciate it. And I kind of, that's interesting that's happening.
Yeah.
They're like Canadian sense of humor is only comparable to the way that like Finn humor is against the rest of that region, or like the New Zealand humor compared to Australian humor. You're like Canadians are like America's New Zealand.
They should use that in promo. That sounds like something a Canadian would find funny as well. Canada, America's New Zealand. So Sam, what are your thoughts on Cronenberg? What are your favorites?
I'd say my favorite is probably The Brood. I think it's maybe like a more uneven movie than some of his later stuff, but at the same time it has exactly what I want out of like that era Cronenberg, where it's the kind of isolated, secretive organization that are like fucking with someone. They don't know they're really fucking with someone, you know, the way that they're manipulating the guy's ex-wife. There's just something about like the tone and atmosphere of that movie that I just love. I absolutely love it. The earliest Cronenberg I remember seeing is Scanners, and I was trying to like recall back. I remember seeing it at my dad's house. It was probably on like the illegally descrambled cable that we had. And I didn't know exactly what was going on. And then a bunch of crazy stuff happened where people's veins were like sticking out and they were staring at each other and shaking. And I just have like this distinct memory of that, of seeing that. And then years later, being the kind of VHS era, I recall seeing the sequels, which I think are maybe Charles Band produced sequels, which I've never seen as an adult, but then like going back and being like, what are the, like picking them up at the video store and then being like, what's the original? What is this movie? And then like rewatching it and being like, oh, holy shit. Yeah. And then just kind of through high school, see like watching The Fly and watching Videodrome. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, he hasn't made a movie I haven't liked, but there's a few I haven't seen. I've never seen Maps to the Stars.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I'm an asshole for co-editing an anthology about the man. I've also never seen Fast Company. Yeah, and I think I've never seen M Butterfly either. I think I have it on a hard drive. Been meaning to watch it, but I just never got to it.
I saw, and I want to talk about Kathy Koja, because she's done the foreword for this book. I saw that she'd posted about, she was asking her Facebook friends like what their favorite Cronenbergs were. Maps to the Stars didn't come up, and Scanners, I didn't see any Scanners fans either, although I think of that as one of the best ones.
Yeah, great. That one's so good, and that I thought that's like a cult classic.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might get a little overshadowed by, specifically, it's like The Fly and Videodrome are the films that I think like Cronenberg fans think of when they think of, generally speaking. Mm-hmm. It's like those kind of are they typify his like almost two distinct styles, but yeah, I think those are like the heavy hitters when it comes to his classic period work. Mm-hmm. Which honestly, like for editing the anthology, was a little bit of a pain because there's a lot of stories that reference The Fly or things similar to The Fly, which is cool, but at the same time, it's like that's not even obviously an original IP of his, which maybe should have been more clear on, or more interested in the stuff he like fully created than like, here's this remake or here's this adaptation. And then also we got quite a few Videodrome, like really heavy Videodrome references and submissions, mm-hmm. where it's like, this would be obvious to anyone who's even like heard of the movie.
Having done this a few times, I'm always keen to not directly reference the thing that's in the submission call. It's an homage anthology to this thing. Don't mention it. Don't mention the first. If it's the first 3 films, the first 3 albums, all right. Don't mention those at all, because you're going to get a slew of things like, oh, I was at home watching The Fly when my story started. You're like, all right, great. I've got 20 other guys giving me the same thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. We only let one story in where there's an actual reference to David Cronenberg himself. And that's Charles Austin Muir, who's a very good friend of ours and an amazing writer. His whole thing that one of his he does a couple things really well, but one of his things is like hilarious, like meta horror. And so he had these not even passing, these full-on references to David Cronenberg himself. And just knowing like what he does and how well it worked in the story, I was like, this is the one that gets a pass. Literally, no one else can reference him by name, but I'll give it to Charles. He can have it.
So I don't know who's best posed to answer this question, or maybe you can both comment on it. But like, how did you go about assembling this anthology, picking the stories, putting it together?
It was pretty much a full-on collaborative effort. We co-wrote the submission guidelines. Like we both had ideas that we thought were important to include, which most of them had been based off our previous like initial conversation all those years ago about what you would want if you're going to do a Cronenberg anthology, where it isn't like, because I think our fear was that we were just going to get a bunch of body horror with none of the other Cronenbergian elements. And we absolutely did get a lot of that. But there were the people who kind of like read literally all the other parts that we said, where it's like, you know, you want like the shadowy organization pulling the strings. You want the philosophical or psychological illumination in there, where there's like the subtext of, I don't know, back and forth between different perspectives, like different like philosophical perspectives, like he does, like maybe a new age element, but without going full magic. There's like all sorts of things, like themes in his work that transcend the just body horror. And so we made sure to include that, as that had been like in our initial conversation. Oh yeah, it would have to have these other elements. I'm sure there are more. I can't think of what they were, but do you have one?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I think one of the major things too that we talked about is like, we are trying to pick stories that sort of fit the idea that, like, what if Cronenberg were still making films today in today's social climate, and with like the evolving times and technologies, and how what his ideas apply, to today's to like current times. So a lot of the stories do that and like beautifully, and but that was like one of the things we're really looking after.
Yeah, like the synthesis of man and technology, especially in a modern context, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Like essential. I mean, there are stories that don't have it, but like that was a thing that we wanted at least some, right? Because you don't want everybody to pick the same two elements. You want people to pick different, so the stories are different. So yeah, we did the sub call, and then we just waited for the submissions to pour in. And I think I kind of shot us in the foot, because I was like, let's not read them until we get all of them in. And our open submission period was 3 months. It was actually a little over 3 months, just because I wanted to give people, we didn't really do any like, this is coming, so start to write your story. Tend to do the like, now it's open, so write your story and get it in before the end. And 3 months feels like a good amount of time for that. But so then at the end of those 3 months, we looked in our inbox and had 200 submissions that we clearly should have started reading earlier. Yeah, and then the process we went with was we each just tried to read them all, and then we took notes on them. And I had like a Google Docs spreadsheet, or a Google Docs document that was color coded, where I would like use color to kind of rate the stories, like automatic rejection because it doesn't fit the theme, or I hate it, or like not auto, like my very much dislike file, and then like up from there to like these are the ones I absolutely adore. And once we got to 50, we'd each read the first 50 stories, then we discussed those so that we could send out a first round of rejections instead of making everybody wait the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like it was smarter to kind of break it up into batches. Mm-hmm. Then we did the next around 100, and yeah, we just compiled a short list of the ones that like either one of us liked, and even if the other didn't, or that we both liked, with no like ultimate decision made other than like, here's what we're keeping from this patch and we're rejecting the rest. Mm-hmm. And we would have Skype conversations where we would talk through like stories. We'd like email each other at work, like, here's the stories that I just read, that like, watch out for this one. I know this one starts with once upon a time. And then for the editorial process, it was a lot of, for the picking the stories, we kind of compared notes. We came to a final master list that I think was at 18 stories.
Yeah.
And then we were forced, just because we were already going to be over, we had to remove 2. And so that the book is 10,000 more words than I wanted it to be, because we reached a point where neither of us could like I can't reject any of these stories. I literally like all of these stories. Like they're the best, and losing any one of them would be to a detriment to the book. Brendan, if you want to talk a little bit about the editorial process, so I'm not just going on and on.
No, it's exactly as you described. And it was the funny part was just the challenge, because it was so much reading. And I'm what was it, 800,000 words? You did a calculation today?
I really did the math on it today, and the amount of stories we got, if they're, average story length is about 4,000 words, which might be slightly high, but maybe 3,800 is probably perfect. But if it's at 4,000 and we read 200 stories, then 800,000 words.
Yeah, it was daunting too, because Sam obviously had edited a few other anthologies before, and this was my first time ever doing this. So I think at the beginning I asked him so how can we expect how much? I think he was 80 to 100. Maybe we'll get more because it's Cronenberg. And then we ended up with a whole whack of them. But it was a great experience, and we ended up with some really great stories. And one of the fun parts was, because of all the work involved, it was trying to squeeze reading and editing into our work days. So we would text each other and be like, "Hey, look what I'm getting away with today. I read 5 stories."
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of on the clock. My boss doesn't seem to care. It's fine.
800,000 words. That's how many short story? That's 20 short story collections or something of not even necessarily publishable material.
Just to put that in perspective too, the not necessarily readable part, when we had after we went through all 200 submissions, when we had our short list, it was 36. So of 200, there were only 36 that were oh, this might work. And even some of those were I don't know if this works. I just want us to both reread it because there's something about it I liked. And about half of those were, this is a cool story but doesn't fit the themes of the anthology. I just liked how it read when I was in the middle of slogging through Witcher fan fiction, which we of. And another story that was just a shot-for-shot retelling of King Midas's Touch. When you're in the slog of that, anything that's decent, I was put it in the short list, which was still only 36 or 38 stories.
There was this weird trend too. You would think Cronenberg, would be a pretty clear idea of what you're gonna write. But we ended up with a lot of stage magician fiction for some odd reason, to the point where I think we both went online and checked whether there was a Cronenberg magician or not. But now we get a few pages in and be like, what the hell? What does this have to do with anything? And then with a lot of stuff like that, it kept us on our toes, I guess.
There must have been a stage magician horror anthology that just finished up its submission call, right?
Oh, maybe.
I guess something like that. That's
we did some Trump fiction too, and that one there were just been a Trump anthology that wrapped previously.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
We were happening at the same time as the Perpetual Motion Machine Pizza anthology, so we didn't get any pizza crossover.
Probably one of the few one of the few things that wasn't affected by the pizza plague.
The great publishing pizza plague of
it's interesting to hear behind the scenes, because they do always talk about like, oh, we received, sometimes it's like over 1,000 stories for certain anthologies or something, but I can't then imagine that, the percentage of material that's appropriate gets any higher than it is for what you had. So say it's like, it must be then like 20 stories out of 100 then roughly are any good.
Yeah, like it's one of those things where like, some of the other ones were certainly good. It's just like good and on theme.
Yeah.
Right. It's like that's like the real battle is, and I know I've done this too. Like I've submitted stories to anthologies where I've been like, I think this is on theme. Like I read the submission guidelines, and then you get it back and it's like, almost as soon as you hit send, it's like, fuck, I actually think I missed the mark on this totally. Like, because you get in your head about like, what's this idea? How can I do my version of this idea? And sometimes it goes way off course. But speaking of the like other anthologies that have gotten like a crazy amount of submissions, I think it was Robert S. Wilson who is doing the Nox Paradelia anthology. He posted on Facebook recently that it was either 500 or 800 submissions. I can't quite remember, but he was like talking about how stressed he was about it because he's actually doing 2 anthologies right now. And I was like, at 200 submissions, I thought I was gonna like go into a seizure because it was getting so stressful. Like, how are we gonna read all of these? And then to like see somebody get that many was kind of mind blowing. Like, good luck. Seriously, good luck.
That would take like a year to read, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have lucky if we got through, 5, I think, in a day.
Yeah,
like we have our day jobs, and I was also working on a draft of my novel at the same time, so it's a lot to handle at once.
Yeah, I think on weekends I can get through like 10 on a day, but then by the end of that you're just like so burned out. And it's like, did I really give those last 4 stories a really good chance, or did I just want to get done reading?
Yeah.
So you don't want to do that to an author, like, especially as authors, you know how much of yourself you put into what you submit, but like your hope is that the person on the other end of it reading it like cares about trying to read it and give it like a fair shake. So I never want to I'm going to slog through 25 submissions today, because it's like you wouldn't remember 90% of them by the end of that. They'd all be one weird story.
So what else do I have to ask you guys about? Oh, let's talk about Kathy Koja. Who came up with the idea to invite her to do the forewords?
I don't know. I think that was an early thing where we were just like, we had like almost like a dream list, right? Where we were like, hey, we should reach out to this person and this person. And I think we originally intended, we were going to ask her for a story, but she didn't. She was busy finalizing, I think, either the edits or she was trying to finish to write her latest book. Forget the name. Something. Is it not Nightmare Factory or something along?
I don't know the name of it. Yeah, I think she was in the middle of edits on that novel, and she was, I think, also finishing up the short story collection that Meerkat is putting out next year, like getting that like finalized. So she didn't have time.
Yeah, and then she agreed to write the introduction, which was more than we could have ever asked for.
Yeah, we went through a process of we had a little list of like, who could we ask if we're going to have somebody who's not us do the introduction, who could we ask? And like, obviously top tier was like Cronenberg himself, who has no social media presence and seemed like fairly hard to access. Although Brendan did find a video online where he says his address. So like, we could like just send him something, but I just assumed, I was like, he's probably never going to reply. I don't know. We're just we're a fly by night operation. So then who was the guy who wrote that book about Videodrome? I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
now I sound like an asshole. He's like an academic who did a study on the movie and wrote and published a book about it. I think maybe St. Martin's Press. I don't remember. Somebody published it. And so we're like, well, he would be like a cool kind of intellectually authoritative voice on, doing the introduction to this. We also talked about the Skoka sisters, because they're doing that Rabid remake. But at the risk of pissing anyone off, I didn't really like American Mary, so it was a little disincentive to ask them. It's fine, it just didn't really grab me. So the list kept being like, well, maybe we won't have anybody do it. I don't know. And then it was just like, fuck, let's just ask Kathy. She doesn't have time to get us a story, which I totally understand. That's a lot more work. Maybe she'll write a foreword for us. And she, and I offered her more for it than the 1 cent a word on it, just to make it give her some value for her time. And she was all on board, and she was like, send it to me as soon as you've got edits. And I was thinking I don't really want to tell you how long this book is that you're probably going to want to read before you write the foreword to. But, we came to a rough, month-long deadline, and she was all on board for it. I don't know, literally couldn't, other than if somehow miraculously David Cronenberg had been available and accessible, I couldn't have asked for a better person to write the foreword. And even when she and I were talking about it, she was like, you don't even understand how big of an influence he was on my generation of writers at that time, where there wasn't, I think, as much influence of film on the writing of horror until, obviously Jack Ketchum was kind of the first to really do that, bring in that kind of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Night of the Living Dead stuff. But I think it took a little while for the weirder shit to trickle down into the writing. It seems like the kind of splatterpunks and her era is when that really hit hard. So it's really cool to have her on board, even in that capacity. I would have loved a story from her, don't get me wrong, but having her attached to it and stoked on it is one of the happiest things about the whole book.
Definitely. And one of the funny things, speaking of the potentiality of having Cronenberg write the introduction, I have this book of screenplays. It's all the early screenplays of Cronenberg. I think it includes Crimes of the Future, Stereo, Rabid, and Shivers. And there's an introduction in there by Cronenberg himself. And the introduction is basically him asking the question, why does this book even exist? And he just sounds very surly. And he's like, screenplays are not meant to be read. They're just basically tools. But it's really funny kind of downer way to start this compilation. And so it's imagine we did get an intro, but it was just really pissed off and he doesn't understand what we're doing.
Why did these fucking assholes make this book with my name on it?
Yeah.
That sounds like it would be great anyway, go for it.
Yeah. We'll embrace it.
Yeah, oh yeah. If we had gotten him and he had sent us something like that, I totally would have put it in that.
Does the book have a specific release date yet?
Roughly October. We now have the bones of everything. We have all the edited stories. I recently got the introduction from Kathy, and I just recently got the back cover art, which a friend of mine, Sarah Huskin and Sanders, did. And that took her a little while because she just had some stuff come up. But we still need to we need to write the back cover copy and have that put that that on there. And then we also want to write in outro after the book, kind of about the experience of why we did the book, since we're not doing an introduction. Mm-hmm. And then I need to do all the formatting and whatnot. So I'm giving myself and hopefully October, maybe November. It'd be great to have it out before Halloween, but at the same time, I don't want to rush anything. I want to make sure it's pretty as pristine as we can make it at this point.
Cool. And how are you guys collaborating now? Is it still Skype, or is it emails, or there's not so much to do anymore?
It's been pretty quiet for now, at least. We were just waiting on that back cover and stuff. But I'm sure we usually we talk pretty much every day over Messenger and stuff. And when there's quite a bit, I think actually we're due for a Skype Skype call just for that, writing that afterward. But yeah, I don't know if we should mention this now, but this is not our only collaboration. We're planning, I don't know if we've called it a winter project. So I think, it's a few months yet until we start actually really concentrating on it, but we're going to work on this novel together. And Sam, I don't know if you want to talk about the plot.
Yeah, sure. Brendan and I have a mutual love of young adult horror books from the 90s, especially the ones that the title starts with a G and has some bumps in it. So we were talking about making a novel that surrounds an adult survivors of childhood trauma support group, where as they're discussing their childhood trauma, these 8 people realize that what they think happened isn't what happened, and they're actually survivors of kind of Goosebumps-esque things that they've repressed in their minds as a way of kind of finding the real world again. But it'll be way, I mean, I don't say way, but it'll be more fucked up and intense versions of those kind of stories where it's that's the initial memories are oh yeah, there was a gremlin in the camera and then some stuff happened, but it's really insidious and bad. And through their memories of this, those things start materializing in their life again through the just kind of giving something mental space makes it real. So that's, I don't know, we're talking about potentially having an artist or maybe 8 artists each illustrate, do a black and white illustrations of each of the creatures we're going to create and have those throughout the book. I don't know. I don't know if you have more to add. That's kind of the rough.
Yeah, because basically the whole thing is all those young adult books, those are the repressed memories of these characters. So they're because of the post-traumatic stress they created sort of these kind of cushy, not quite scary versions of the events, which are actually a lot more traumatic and disturbing and messed up. So that's what we're just going to try to, more adult, basically it's obviously directed at people from our generation who grew up reading these books. And, if you're curious to see where these people end up, but also sort of acknowledging that source material.
Yeah. That sounds great. Yeah.
The novella that I recently submitted for publication is called Sabbath of the Fox Devils. And like I said, I started developing it in one of Garrett Cook's workshops, and he told me that it read like a fucked up splatterpunk version of a Goosebumps book. And so then we started talking about that and talking about our love of that. That kind of spawned this idea of taking that style and taking those kind of story types, but splattering them.
Well, that's awesome. Best of luck with that. I mean, it will give you guys something to do in the long winter.
Yeah. We both have bad winters, so it'll be nice.
Oh yeah, yeah. But it is the best time to be, indoors and writing, I find, in the winter.
Definitely, yeah.
And lots of people have told me that they have crazier dreams in winter as well. I certainly do. Do
Interesting.
You guys? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I always wish I had more vivid dreams. All my friends seem to have more vivid dreams than I do. And I have these very mundane, last night, this morning, sorry, my partner was like, you remember what you did last night? And I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah, I was going to bed around 11 o'clock and you were already asleep and you're getting out of bed and getting dressed for work. And she was like, what are you doing? And you're like, I want a head start. I want to get to work. I need to get dressed at some point. She's like, it's not even the middle of the night, back in bed. And it's like, and I was apparently getting angry. But so I do this weird, like nighttime, almost like sleepwalking / these. I've had like nighttime hallucinations, but like never vivid, like, full kind of like narrative dreams.
Mm. Oh dear. So yeah, no, I think those were all my questions. Normally at the end of the episode I ask people to promote things. So Brendan, your book Nightmares and Ecstasy is available Clash Books right now. Swallow and Ash and Other Sorrows out with Nihilism Revised.
October 11th.
October 11th, great. Both excellent books. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
So that was Sam Richard and Brendan Vidito. The New Flesh, a literary tribute to David Cronenberg, should be out probably in November with Weirdpunk Books. Stay tuned. If you're a reader, writer, editor, listener of any variety, you want to be on the show, you want to tell me something about it, you can always get in touch with me using losingtheplotpodcast@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, that's all from me. So, bye bye.